First story. Hello friends. Today I'm going on an amazing adventure, camping in the heart of the wilderness. I've already arrived at my destination, and it looks pretty rundown. But that makes this place even more mysterious, doesn't it? All my friends thought the place was great and relaxing, and the open air was what we really needed right now. We set up camp and had dinner by firelight. Everything was fine until this strange sound started in the forest. I decided to go check what was going on. The light of the torch illuminated my steps in the darkness. The forest was gloomy and full of mysterious noises. And then I saw something behind the trees. It was a shadow, tall and frightening. She moved quickly and I had to run back to camp. My friends thought that I was just over-imagining, but it seemed to me that this was not just a play of shadows. The night was quickly coming to an end, and we decided to go into the tent. But I could not forget what I saw in the forest. Already inside the tent, I heard strange rustling in the bushes in the distance. The noise grew closer, and then something drowned out of our laughter and conversations. Everyone silently fell to the ground, and the sounds became louder. And then something terrible crawled out of the darkness. It was a man, but his clothes were cut and covered with dirt. He was not smiling, and his eyes sparkled in the darkness. We decided to run, but he was faster. He was approaching, and our screams sounded like curses in this crazy night. We ran through the forest until we finally came to a high fence. It was an abandoned manor. We climbed over the fence and hid in the old house, hoping that he wouldn't find us. But inside the house it was no better. The walls were covered with dust, and the writing on the walls seemed like strange symbols. And then we heard his steps outside the house. He wasn't just chasing us, he wanted to say something. He spoke with a pleading tone. "You shouldn't have come here. They won't let you leave." We decided to stay in this house and hide from him. And this went on for several hours. Finally, at dawn, he disappeared and we got out of the house. Our campsite turned into a nightmare and we decided to forget about this place forever. Friends, this was the worst night of my life. None of us know what kind of creature it was or why it was pursuing us. If you have any ideas, please share them in the comments. In the meantime, stay safe and don't forget that dark forests can hide dark secrets. After this terrible night in an abandoned estate, we decided to leave this place as quickly as possible. The sun had just begun to rise, and the forest, which the day before seemed so mysterious and beautiful, was now full of horror. We reached our campsite and packed our things without wasting any time. Already in the car, we tried to figure out what happened. We learned that local residents avoided this estate and spoke of dark legends associated with it. According to them, the estate belonged to a mysterious family that practiced strange rituals and cults. They performed mystical rituals and sacrifices in this place. Some claimed that their descendants still lived in the forest, or that they had become something inhuman. We decided to leave this place behind and never return. But the terrible memories remained with us. We told other people about this incident and tried to find out more information about that terrible night. But no matter what it was, it changed us forever. We could no longer look at the forests and campsites with the same innocence. We realized that beyond the beautiful landscapes and cozy fires, there could be darkness and horror. Second story. The sunset was beautiful and my friends and I had just set up camp by the lake. The fire was crackling and we were getting ready for the evening's dinner. Everything was perfect until something strange happened. As soon as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, something inexplicable began. I heard rustling sounds in the forest around our camp, as if someone was silently approaching. My friends heard it too and exchanged glances full of alarm. We decided to ignore it because the forest is full of animals at night, but the rustling became more insistent and closer. I stood up and took a flashlight to see what was happening. It was at this moment that the wind suddenly died down, and a dark whisper was heard in the forest, as if someone was whispering spells. The whisper became louder, but the words remained unclear and unintelligible. We were surrounded by darkness and mysterious sounds, and fear gripped us. At that moment, I felt the touch of a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around, but I didn't see anyone. My friends began to experience the same touches. It was something invisible, something that watched us in the darkness. Fear took over us, and we decided to pack our things and run away from this place. But as we began to gather, ghostly figures began to flicker around the camp, as if the spirits of the ancestors had returned to punish us for trespassing on their sacred lands. We dropped everything and ran without looking back. We didn't know what happened that night, but we were sure it was something supernatural. We returned to the city and never dared to return to that forest again. My story is cut short, but what happened after that night remains forever a mystery. Perhaps there are old spirits hiding in this forest, or something else that we cannot understand. And I became convinced that there are places in nature where it is better not to invade, and forces that it is better not to irritate. After our rescue from the forest, we returned to the city, but the mystery of that night haunted us. We began to research the history of this place and found out that it was the owner of long-standing legends and mystical stories. Local residents told us about the spirits of the forest who protected this area of nature. They said that at night they came to life and punished everyone who dared to disturb the sacred tranquility of the place. But those were just legends, right? We decided to return to this forest during the day, hoping to find some explanation for what happened. When we arrived, everything seemed ordinary and calm. But as we approached the place where our camp was located, something began to be felt in the air. We heard faint whispers, like the voices of ghosts, and it seemed as if the trees were leaning towards us, as if they were trying to say something. Suddenly, I felt a cold wind even though it was a hot day. We arrived at the place where we were camping and saw something that made our hearts skip a beat. Strange symbols were drawn on the ground. Their images seemed ancient and mystical. We couldn't figure out who or what drew them. It was at this moment that we realized that this place really carries some mystical powers. We decided to leave and never return, because meeting the unknown always brings fear and disturbing memories. So friends, be careful when you decide to go to distant corners of nature. It contains secrets that are sometimes best left unrevealed. Thank you for listening to this story, and remember that nature can keep terrible secrets. Third story. When we, a group of old friends, decided to spend a weekend in the wild, none of us expected that our desire for a fun and carefree time would lead to something that we would forever remember. Our camp was located deep in the forest, with no cell phone signal or people on the horizon. From the very first evening, we began to miss the connection with the outside world, and this seemed to increase our desire to do something unusual to have fun. One of our friends, Max, suggested doing a Ouija board session to try to contact the spirits. At first, everyone laughed at the idea, but in the evening, when the fire obscured the night, we felt a wave of excitement and decided to try it. We gathered in a circle around the board and started asking questions. At first, nothing happened, but after much prayer and persistent requests, the board began to move. We thought it was a joke from one of our friends, but suddenly the letters started forming words. "Who are you?" we asked. The board replied, "We are the forgotten ones." Mysterious spirits found their way to us, and we continued our conversation. We asked them questions, and they answered with terrifying accuracy. They told us about death, that they needed help, and how they were lost in this forest and could no longer leave. Suddenly, the night around us began to be filled with inexplicable sounds and shadows that stretched towards our fire. We felt that something sinister was approaching. Fear gripped us, and we closed the session. But the board did not allow itself to be closed. She moved erratically, as if the spirits could not be stopped now. The darkness thickened around us, and we heard whispers and screams that seemed real, but did not bring any hope. We dropped everything and tried to escape from the camp, but deep in the forest we still felt like we were being followed. What happened that night remains a mystery to us. We got out of the forest and left this place, but the fear of the unknown remained with us. We realized that playing with something in this forest was a dangerous game, and we would never return there again. Since we returned from this forest, our lives have changed forever. Scary dreams haunted us, and we felt that something was penetrating our dreams. We decided to turn to a psychic to try to unravel the mystery of what happened. The psychic conducted a cleansing session for us, and we unraveled the tangle of strange events. It turned out that the forest in which we camped had long ago been a place of sacrifice for some ancient culture. They believed in powerful nature spirits, and it was their souls that we summoned that night. Our actions disturbed the ancient tranquility of the forest, and the spirits were angry. They pursued us, trying to take back what we had violated. With the help of a psychic, we sent them our apologies and asked for forgiveness for our reckless actions. Over time, strange phenomena stopped haunting us, but the memory of that night remained forever. We realized that nature and the spirits within it can be much more powerful than we think, and that we must always respect and take care of the world around us. The story I've told is a reminder that the world is full of secrets and unknown powers, and it's never a good idea to play with something we don't understand. Fourth story. I remember this camp like it was yesterday. It was summer, and I, along with other parents, sent my son, Mike, to a children's camping trip in the mountains. He was at an age when he could already spend the summer without us and enjoy nature. We settled into a small camper and spent the days waiting for him to return from camp. In the beginning, everything was as usual. We received letters from him in which he described his adventures and new friends. But after a couple of weeks, he stopped writing. We became concerned and started calling the camp, but were told that Mike was doing well, and that perhaps he simply forgot to write. But we knew our son, and this was not like him. One evening, as usual, we were sitting by the fire near the camper when we heard a loud wind howl and whistle. The weather suddenly changed and it started to rain. We felt that something was wrong and went to bed with uneasy feelings. The next morning when we woke up, the camper was empty. Mike wasn't there. We panicked and started searching every corner of the camp. We asked other children, but no one saw him. It became clear to us that he had disappeared. We called the police and they began an investigation. Through tears and pain, we told them what happened. Days began to turn into weeks, weeks into months. But Mike never returned. The investigation led nowhere. We started meeting other parents whose children had disappeared in the same camp. It turned out that we had something in common. They all disappeared during the night, when the weather changed dramatically and the winds whistled just like that night. We decided to go to the mountains and solve this riddle ourselves. We stayed there for weeks, exploring the area around the camp and unraveling the clues we found in our children's writings. But we didn't find anything that could give us an answer. Over time, our group of parents began to disintegrate. Some returned to the city, but we stayed, sincerely hoping that one day we would find Mike. But the more time passed, the more mysteries we found in this place. We began to believe that something sinister and inhuman lived in these mountains. Since then, our life has never returned to the same. We continue to search for our son, but the mystery of his disappearance remains unsolved. The camp in the mountains no longer exists, and our place there became one of many empty places in this valley. Thus ended my story about the search for my son and the mysterious disappearances of children in that terrible camp in the mountains. But one thing remains unchanged. We will never forget this nightmare and will continue to search for answers until we solve this mystery. Our search continued for years, and although the police considered this case unsolved, we parents could not give up hope. We created a fund to search for missing children and raised funds for a more thorough investigation of disappearances in that terrible camp. Despite many efforts and the involvement of experts, we could not get closer to solving the mystery. However, when we began to investigate the surrounding mountains in more detail and conduct extensive search operations, we discovered something strange. Among the rocks and valleys of the mountains, we discovered many old caves that seemed forgotten for centuries. Artifacts and scrolls with ancient texts that related to rituals and the calling of spirits were found inside them. These finds shed light on the camp's past and could be the key to solving the mystery. Upon further investigation, we discovered that in the camp where the children disappeared, there was indeed a long-standing cult community that practiced mystical rituals. Evidence spoke of the calling of spirits and offers made in the name of mysterious entities. We learned that the change in weather on the day Mike and the others disappeared may have been part of a ritual that opened access to the spirit world. Perhaps the children were victims of a long-standing cult that believed their souls could bring them power. With our new discoveries, we turned to the police, providing evidence of the rituals and mystical practices carried out in this camp. The investigation took a new turn, and public pressure forced the police to search for answers. Although the disappearances of the children remain unsolved to this day, we hope that our efforts will lead to solving this terrible mystery and ensuring that other families do not lose their children in this sinister camp. Since we began our investigation, the Find Forgotten Children campaign has become more active, and we continue to gather information and support from the public. We hope that with every step we take towards solving the mystery, we get closer to the point where we can find answers and find our missing children. Fifth story. This was the type of camp where unforgettable adventures became commonplace. We, a group of old friends, went to this place to reminisce old times and create new memories. For the most part, we were just relaxing, enjoying nature and having fun. However, one evening, under the influence of a fire and a few glasses of beer, we decided to come up with something interesting. Last summer, we had our own prank, but this time we wanted to do something more ambitious. Our director, a man named Harry, was terribly pedantic and picky. He always tried to maintain discipline, and we decided that we would give him a gift. According to the plan, we wanted to act out a scene in which some new director comes to the camp and begins to create chaos. We prepared the props and dressed one of our friends, Steve, as the new director. Everything started out great. We arranged a meeting where Steve came on stage in a suit stolen from a costume rental shop. We began to admire his directorial manners, and at first Harry seemed to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But gradually he began to realize that it was just a joke, and his face lit up with a smile. However, when we told him that it was just a prank, his mood changed dramatically. Harry stopped laughing and looked at us with a serious look. "Okay, friends, it was funny, but let's not make jokes like that anymore," he said. We were surprised by his reaction, but decided that it was still fun and quite harmless. We continued to have fun, but after a while we began to feel that something was wrong. Harry began to behave strangely. He started looking after us as if we were children and watched our every move. As the days passed, his behavior became more and more strange. He forbade us to leave the camp and imposed his strict rules on us. We realized that something was wrong and decided to find out what was going on. One day, after Harry had gone to bed, we broke into his office and began rummaging through his personal belongings. There we found strange documents and records that indicated that he was not, in fact, our real director. We began to investigate this mystery and soon found out that Harry was in fact a man who went on a journey and imitated our headmaster in order to hide his identity. His real intentions remained a mystery, but it was clear to us that something was wrong with him. We got together and decided to take back control of the camp and find out what secrets this fake director was hiding. Our story is far from over, and we must understand what is really hiding in the camp and how we will return normality to our summer holidays. We knew something strange was going on and decided to hold a meeting among the campers to tell them the truth about the fake director. Everyone was shocked to hear this story, and many began to ask questions. Why did he do this? And what was he hiding? However, our shock turned to horror when we discovered that Harry had disappeared. His office was empty and his belongings were gone. He seemed to leave when we discovered his secret, and his intentions remained unclear. We decided to report the incident to the local police, and the hunt for the fake director began. However, the days passed and traces of Harry disappeared, as if he had never existed. This mysterious story raised endless questions, but they were never answered. We decided to end our stay at this campsite and return home. There we continued to follow the news in hope that Harry would be found and the mystery of his actions would be solved. However, every day, the hope for his return diminished. We were left with a terrible mystery that will forever remain in our memory. Who was this person who replaced our director, and what were his true intentions? We will never know the answers to these questions, but one thing remains forever. That camp and that summer camping will forever remain a place of strange and mysterious events in our lives. Sixth story. This summer outdoor adventure promised to be unforgettable. Me and my friends went to the wild forest for camping to enjoy freedom and nature. Our camp was in a remote area with no civilization around. The first night, everything was perfect. We lit a fire, exchanged stories and songs, and then went to our tents to sleep. However, on the second night, something began to change. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by a strange sound. Someone was knocking on the window of my tent. I figured it was just one of my friends trying to prank me. I left the tent and looked around, but there was no one around. I went back to sleep, but the knocking on the window returned after a while. The next morning, I told my friends about the strange incident, and they said that they also heard knocking noises. At first, we thought it might be other campers, but soon rumors began to spread among us that someone had seen whoever was knocking on the windows. One of our friends, Tom, claimed that he came out of the tent to observe and saw a shadowy figure near one of the tents. He said the figure was too large to be human and moved unnaturally. Fear began to grip our group. Every night there was knocking on the windows, and no one knew who or what was doing it. We began to close the windows and doors more tightly, but the knocking continued. Many of us stopped sleeping, and the atmosphere in the camp became increasingly tense. However, one terrible night, when the knocking on the windows started again, we decided to investigate. We armed ourselves with flashlights and left the tents to find and identify the source of the knocking. And what we saw left us horrified. There was a huge bear standing near one of the tents, which seemed to be trying to get inside. The bear was gigantic, its eyes sparkling in the darkness, and its long claws scratched the window. We screamed, trying to scare it away, and the bear moved back briefly. At this time, one of our friends, Mark, took a gun and, in complete silence, fired into the air. The bear got scared and ran into the forest. We managed to keep him at a distance, and after this incident, the knocking on the windows stopped. We investigated how the bear could get into our camp and become so persistent. It turned out that our forgotten food items attracted him, and he tried to get to them through the windows. This camp left us with forever memories of fear and unknown dangers of nature. We were happy that the bear did not harm us, but none of us could ever forget that terrible night when we were faced with something inexplicable. Seventh story. On the surface, this campsite seemed like the perfect place for a summer adventure. We children were looking forward to our summer in the wild, full of fun games and endless forests. The counselors, a couple of strange guys named Jack and Ben, were assigned to us to supervise and organize the activities. From the very beginning, something seemed strange to me about their behavior. They always approached us in a hurry and always kept their distance. Their looks were somehow cold and observant, and we began to feel that they were hiding something. The first night at camp, when we had a fire and started singing songs, Jack and Ben were visibly nervous. They seemed scared, as if they were expecting something terrible. At night, when we went to bed, I woke up from a strange light coming into our tent. I looked out of the tent and saw Jack and Ben leading our classmates to some strange structure surrounded closer to the wild forest. They walked without resistance, as if they were in a trance. I was overcome with horror and decided to hide and keep an eye on them. After some time they returned, but their behavior was somehow slow and mechanical. They sat down by the fire and began to talk to each other in some incomprehensible language that sounded like a strange whisper. I couldn't make out their words, but they seemed like some kind of mantras. The next morning I told my friends about what I had seen and we decided to gather more information. The night after that, we set up a guard and kept an eye on Jack and Ben. Once again, they led their classmates to a strange structure, and we decided to get closer. The closer we got, the scarier it became. We saw Jack and Ben performing some strange rituals using unknown objects. They touched the bodies of our friends, and they began to make strange sounds, similar to groans and groans. We were terrified, not knowing what to do. But suddenly, something didn't go according to plan. One of our friends began to distort his face, and his eyes began to sparkle with an unnatural light. He clung to Jack, and a truly panicked disaster began to unfold. We rushed to help, and in the chaos we managed to free our friends from the power of Jack and Ben. Sometime later, the police arrived at the camp and Jack and Ben were arrested. It turned out that they were agents of some mysterious organization that was conducting experiments on us. We were saved, but the terrible memories of what happened in that camp will remain with us forever. Eighth story. Friends and I decided to go to a remote and unknown forest to spend a weekend in nature and try something new. The camp we arrived at looked like a place forgotten by time, surrounded by dense forests and cliffs. It welcomed us with a gloomy atmosphere and mysterious legends told by the locals. The first days at camp were fun and carefree. We made a fire, sang songs, and walked in the forest, and nothing foreshadowed trouble. However, on the third day, something began to change. It started when we noticed strange footprints around our camp. They were deep, and it is not clear who left them. Soon after this, we began to hear whispers and mysterious sounds in the night. They came from the depths of the forest and seemed to call us. On the fourth night, one of our friends, Emily, claimed that she saw a figure hidden in the darkness of the forest. She described her as something humanoid, but too strange and unnatural to be an ordinary person. Emily was eager to find out what it was and invited us to follow her. We walked out into the woods into the night, armed with flashlights and terrified hearts. Walking along the mysterious tracks, we came to an open space in the forest. It was here that we saw something that made our hearts skip a beat. Under the darkness of the night, luminous figures began to appear around us, as if from nowhere. They were a shadow, but at the same time they emanated some kind of light. Their movements were smooth and hypnotic, and they began to dance around us. We were paralyzed with fear as we watched these mystical figures. They seemed like ghosts coming from another world. Their dance was strange and hypnotic, and we couldn't take our eyes off it. At first, we thought it was just an illusion. But as the figures got closer, we realized that they actually existed. They touched us, and their touch was as cold as death. However, suddenly, the figures disappeared as mysteriously as they appeared. We were left alone in the middle of the forest, with our hearts pounding with fear and bewilderment. This was just the beginning of our camp nightmare. We decided to find out more about who or what they were and how they were connected to this camp. Ahead of us lay even more terrible discoveries and secrets that we had to reveal. Several days passed after that strange night, and we continued to spend our days in the camp. But now every night we looked into the dark forest with anxiety. Our friends began to disappear one by one, and every time someone disappeared, only traces and mysterious messages were left behind. written on pieces of paper. We got together and decided that we could no longer remain silent. After all, we didn't have the slightest idea who was behind all these mystical events. We decided to go into the deep forest to solve the mystery that surrounded our camp. The tracks we found led us deeper into the forest. We penetrated dense thickets and mysterious caves, where even the light of flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. Inside the cave, we found strange drawings and symbols on the walls that seemed to be some kind of ancient rituals. As we moved deeper, we heard mysterious whispers and sounds coming from the depths of the cave. Suddenly, a luminous figure appeared in front of us, and behind it dozens more similar entities. They moved to the beat of some strange melody, as if calling us. We stood there transfixed, unable to leave. These entities were approaching us, and their touches were becoming stronger. We felt our strength leaving us and the world beginning to fall apart into separate fragments. Only when they started performing some strange ritual around us did we pull ourselves together and start running away. Fear and adrenaline gave us the strength to get out of this nightmare situation. We returned to camp, exhausted from fear and horror. We told other camp participants about what we saw, and together we decided to leave this place and try to find out the truth about what was happening. Our search led us to an ancient legend about forest spirits who live in these places and can call on their path those who boldly go into their territory. Our summer camping experience was a nightmare, and many of us carried away traces of fear and mystery from it forever. We decided that the forest remained a great mystery and never return here again. Ninth story. It all started with our old dream of spending a weekend in nature away from the bustle of the city. We decided to go into the wild depths of the forest, where there was no cell phone signal or other signs of civilization. At the camp, we were greeted by calm nature and cozy tents. The first days were wonderful. We walked through the forest, picked berries, made fires, and explored the surrounding area. But on the third day, when we were getting ready for dinner, I noticed something strange in our provisions. As we started preparing dinner, one of our friends, Mark, took a bag of pasta out of his bag. But when he opened it, we discovered that the pasta was an unusual color. They were deeply black, like coal, and gave off a strange metallic sheen. We laughed and decided that it was just some exotic type of pasta that someone accidentally took with them. Mark put the bag in a pot of water, and we started cooking. But when the pasta began to cook, the water suddenly turned pitch black, and a strange smell began to emanate from it. We decided not to risk it and threw the dish away to make something else. However, when we tried to cook the fish we caught from a nearby stream, we discovered that it too was strangely black in color and had a metallic taste. Panic began to grip our group. We dared to try some other products, but it turned out that they were all contaminated with this strange black substance. Our entire food supply was spoiled, and we had nothing to eat. Rumors and guesses about the origin of this mysterious product began to spread among us. Many began to say that this could be some kind of chemical contamination, or even a sign of something supernatural. Fear and paranoia gripped us all. We were isolated from the outside world, and we had no idea how we could survive when even natural food was contaminated with this strange substance. We were left alone with a mystery to solve, and fear slowly began to grip our group. Our group felt numb and trapped in this wild forest, where even food became a mystery. Panic and anxious talk began to dominate our camp, and none of us could find an explanation for the strange black substance that had contaminated our provisions. The main source of food, fish and berries that we collected around the camp, also turned out to be contaminated. The black substance seemed to permeate the soil and water. We couldn't even think about what to cook next. We decided to go in search of a way out of this trap. Led by Jason, one of our friends, we began exploring the forest in search of some natural food that was not contaminated. However, the deeper we went into the forest, the stranger things became. We began to strange encounter plants that had unnatural black shades and a metallic sheen, just like our contaminated food. Many of these plants were unfamiliar to us and seemed to be something beyond our understanding. We didn't dare take them and try them. The deeper we explored the forest, the quieter the nature around us became. No wind, no birdsong, just dead silence. Time seemed to slow down, and we lost orientation in space. At some point, we came across an open space in the forest. In the middle of this part of the forest stood a strange altar made of black stone. It was covered in strange symbols and designs that we could not read or understand. We felt that this altar had some connection with the black substance that had contaminated our food. Perhaps it was the site of some mysterious rite or ritual. All this filled us with horror, and we realized that we could not stay in this place. Returning to camp, we collected our things and decided to leave the forest. We fled as if from an ominous curse that had gripped this place. We left behind the mystery of the black substance and the altar in the dark forest, and this nightmarish experience will forever remain in our hearts. We no longer wanted to return to this gloomy corner of nature, where even food turns into something strange and scary. 10th story. This was a camping trip we had been planning for months. The place where we went was far from the bustle of the city, surrounded by beautiful nature and promised ideal solitude from everyday worries. Our tents were set up, the fire was burning, and we were looking forward to the night to enjoy the starry sky and natural tranquility. However, on our second day of camping, something started to go wrong. At first, we noticed an unusually strong wind that blew sparks away from our fire. We tried to put out the fire and made sure that all the lights had gone out. The wind was so strong that we even decided to stop that day and stay in tents. At night, the situation worsened. The wind began to rage with such force that our tent began to shake, and the noise of the trees made our hearts skip a beat with fear. We heard the howl of the wind and the cracking of trees, and we realized that this was not an ordinary wind. Something was wrong. Suddenly, we smelled smoke. At first, we thought it was just the smell of a fire that we were trying to put out, but it was stronger and more persistent. We got out of the tents to understand what was happening. And there, in the distance, in the black sky, we saw a flame. The forest was burning, and the fire was approaching us with terrible speed. The wind carried the flame towards us, and we realized that we only had a few minutes left. Panic gripped our group. We dropped everything we had with us and ran to the nearest lake, hoping that the water would help us survive. The fire was already close, and I felt the heat from it burn my face. We swam in the lake, feeling like our lives were hanging by a thread. The entire forest around us was on fire, and we saw the trees burn in the blink of an eye. Our campsite was destroyed by fire, and we were grateful that we were able to survive. The fire lasted for several days, and we had to wait for the fire services to put it out. Our campsite became a devastated and scorched place, and we were left with a sense of loss and fear of the elements of nature. This night of the fire will always remain in our memories as a nightmare that we barely survived. After the fire was extinguished and our campsite became a devastated plateau, we began to notice strange things. At first, it was something insignificant, as if nature was trying to recover from a devastating fire. But soon more inexplicable phenomena began to occur. In the evenings, when night fell on this abandoned place, we heard strange whispers of the wind and vague rustlings in the forest. It seemed as if nature was waking up after a long sleep and trying to tell us something. One day, one of our friends decided to spend the night in the forest to unravel the mysteries that seemed to surround us after the fire. In the darkness, he saw some luminous figures moving among the burnt trees. He described them as ghostly silhouettes emitting light and said they were trying to communicate with him. We began to doubt our friend's sanity, but he claimed that he had seen something inexplicable. The nights began to be filled with strange events. Sometimes we heard melodious songs that came from the forest, as if calling us. Others claimed to have seen shadows moving among the rubble. Our farewells began to become more and more mysterious. In the evenings, we gathered around the fire and listened to these strange sounds and whispers. We began to explore the remains of the fire and found things that seemed unusual. It was as if nature was creating its own riddles among the rubble. Our campsite, which was destroyed by fire, became the site of strange phenomena, and it became clear to us that we would not be able to forget what happened. This place has become something more than just a camp. It has become a mystery and a mystical story that will forever remain in our memories. 11th story. This story began the day a new girl, Laura, joined our camping group. She was a mysterious girl with dark hair and deep eyes that seemed to hide secrets. Laura had recently moved to our city, and this was her first adventure with us. Our friends received Laura with warmth and joy, and in the evening, gathered around the fire, we began to tell stories and get to know each other. Laura, however, remained silent and mysterious. She listened carefully, but did not reveal her own stories or past adventures. The first night in the forest passed quietly, but when the morning came, we discovered that something strange had happened. Our things were mixed up, our tents almost collapsed, and our food disappeared. We thought it might be some kind of prank from Laura, but she denied any involvement in these events. The next few days were filled with mysterious incidents. We heard strange footsteps in the night and saw glowing eyes in the distance. Someone was pushing our tents and leaving messages written on black sheets of paper. We felt like someone was watching us, but we couldn't figure out who it was. Laura also began to behave strangely. She went into the forest for long hours, refused to share information about her trips, and seemed more and more distant. One night, one of our friends noticed that Laura was talking in her sleep, as if to someone who was nearby. The situation became tense and fear rushed through our group. We didn't know what was going on, and it seemed that Laura's secrets and the mysterious events around us were inextricably linked. We began to wonder if Laura had brought something sinister or mystical with her that was beginning to influence our campsite and attract something strange. Every day, the mysterious events in the forest continued, and our fear grew. We began to feel that the forest itself had a certain power, and that it was connected in some way to Laura. Fear and paranoia took over us, and we were afraid to continue our adventure. However, one day, when Laura went to the forest as usual, she did not return. We were terrified and started looking for her, shouting her name through the trees and worrying for her safety. The search continued for many hours, but Laura was never found. In the end, we decided to report the loss to local services, and the search became more organized. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, but Laura was never found. Her disappearance remained a great mystery, and we were left with unsolved mysteries. Gradually, our fear subsided, and we decided to leave this damn place. Our campsite became the site of dark and mysterious events, and we decided never to return there again. Laura remains forever in our hearts as a mystery that has never been solved. The story of the new girl, the mysterious events, and the disappearance of Laura has become part of our legend. Our experience in that forest strengthened our friendship and left an everlasting mark on our memories. But one thing remained unchanged. Laura's mystery remained unsolved, and they will be with us forever. 12th story. That night when we went to the campsite, I could not imagine that something so mysterious and terrible awaited us. We chose a remote location in the mountains where our campsite exceeded all expectations. Our camp was located on a high plateau with magnificent views of the mountains and lake. The Queen of Spades, as we called this mysterious place, was one of the main attractions in the area. They said that the spirit of a woman who died here a long time ago still haunts these places. Locals told many stories about how she was a dark omen and how meeting her could bring bad luck. We were skeptical of these legends and considered them only fairy tales for the entertainment of tourists. After all, what could be frightening in a story about a woman at the peak? However, on our first night of camping, something strange happened. We were gathered around the fire, telling stories and laughing, when suddenly a strange female figure in a white dress appeared. She stood on the top of the hill and looked at us. In this gloomy night, her silhouette seemed to sparkle in the darkness. We looked at each other and our faces turned pale. Many of us have felt fear numb our movements. None of us knew what to do, and we just watched this mysterious figure that seemed unreal. The Queen of Spades didn't move. She just stood there looking at us. We tried to dim the light of the lanterns and tried to call to her, but she did not respond. With every minute, the fear became stronger, and it seemed to us that time it stood still. That night at the peak turned out to be the most terrible and mysterious night of our lives. The Queen of Spades remained in her place until dawn, after which she slowly disappeared into thin air, as if she had never existed. We never found out who she was or why she came to us. This event left a trace of mystery and fear of the unknown in our hearts forever. The morning after the meeting with the Queen of Spades, the atmosphere in our camp was tense. None of us forgot that mysterious look and unusual event last night. Everyone tried to find an explanation, but no logical answers were found. Determined not to let fear take over, we decided to spend an active day exploring the area and enjoying nature. However, when we set out on one of the trails that led to the top of the peak, things started to get even stranger. We noticed that our path began to change. The road we knew seemed twisted, as if someone had moved trees and rocks to create a new route. We tried to return, but realized that we could not find our way back. This place seemed to change itself and would not let us leave. Time passed, and we continued to move deeper into the forest until we reached some remote place that we had never seen before. There, among the trees, stood an ancient spring from which muddy water flowed. It was at that moment that we noticed that the Queen of Spades was standing among the trees. She looked at us again, but this time her gaze seemed less mystical and more sad. She invited us to the source and slowly began to tell the story of her fate. According to her, she was a young woman who fell in love with a traveler and went with him to this peak. However, their romance ended tragically when he died in the mountains. She remained here, forever wandering in search of his soul. Listening to this story, we felt sympathy and compassion for the Queen of Spades. We realized that she did not come to us with evil intentions, but was only a lonely spirit, condemned to wander forever. We decided to honor the memory of her beloved by creating a memorial at the spring. When we returned to our camp, the atmosphere had changed and the fear was gone. We spent the rest of the campsite in peace and quiet, knowing that the Queen of Spades would no longer bother us. This story teaches us that even the most terrifying encounters can hide much deeper and more moving stories.